Alright, hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf. Today we are continuing and most likely, hopefully finishing the lectures on the proofs of God. We are on the 16th lecture, Religions of Absolute Necessity. The preceding lectures have had as their object the dialectical aspect and absolute fluidity of the determinate qualities that enter into the movement comprising this first form of elevation of the spirit to God, from contingency to absolute necessity. We have now to consider further and on its own account the result as determined by the starting point that has been adopted. This result is the absolutely necessary being or essence. The meaning of a result is known to be simply that in it the condition of mediation, and along with it the result too, has been sublated. The mediation was the self-sublating of mediation. Essence means what is as yet wholly abstract identity with self. It is not subject, and still less is it spirit. The entire condition of mediation is found in absolute necessity, which as being is precisely and immediately something that has being, something that in fact implicitly resolves itself into subject, but initially in the merely superficial form of having being, the form of the absolutely necessary. Alright, that's a formulation I've never seen him talk about, but it goes perfectly well with what we know about his method. The meaning of a result is known to be simply that in it the condition of mediation, along with it of the result too, has been sublated. The mediation was the self-sublating of mediation. I don't know why I found that funny, but well, no, I do know why I find that funny. For people who don't understand Hegel, who haven't read Hegel and thought about it, this must sound like a bunch of gobbledygook. But this telling us about the structure of results. Results are what? These results are sublations. Just as being and nothing come together as becoming in their dynamic movement. Becoming is the result, is the sublation, and it is the mediation of being and nothing with each other in which they mediate each other. And that mediation itself is becoming, but becoming is the mediation which mediates. It is a mediated mediation, but because it is mediated mediation, it is immediately mediated. I don't know if that makes sense to if that would make sense to people who aren't exactly following this. I suppose if you could put it in a written form, it's fairly easy to follow. Like the point is, you have the parts. The parts then come into relationship, which is the so-called first negation, a distinguishing relationship where they're mediated by not being each other in some manner. Then you can take this whole distinction of a mutual distinction as one distinction, because it is. It's one determinateness. So it's not just that, nothing. It's not two mediations. It's not that being mediates nothing and nothing mediates being. In reality, you find out that in this circuit of this thought, you actually only have one mediation, and that mediation is becoming, which unites and sets apart both being and nothing. So that which is mediated, being and nothing in this case, would be at the level of becoming is the mediation, but the mediation is mediating itself. Because being and nothing are themselves becoming. So what is mediated there is not something different from what's mediating, therefore it's really immediate. So it's a self-mediation. So it says the mediation was the self-sublation of mediation. We return to an immediacy when we make the movement of sublating. Right, anybody have issues with that? Follows? Make sense? Josh, Danny?
Yep.
All right. Continuing. That this category of necessity is not adequate to our representation of God is a defect that we may for the moment set aside, inasmuch as it has already been indicated that the other proofs bring with them further and more concrete determinations. There are, however, religions and philosophical systems whose defectiveness consists just in this, that they have gotten beyond the category of absolute necessity. The consideration of the more concrete shapes in which this principle has taken form in their religions belongs to the philosophy of religion and history of religions. Regarding this aspect of the subject, it may be here remarked merely that in general these religions that are based on this category have become, in terms of the inner consequence of concrete spirit, richer and more varied than the abstract principle initially allows for. In appearance and in consciousness, further elements of the idea in its fulfillment are superadded in a way that is inconsistent with that abstract principle. But it is essential to determine whether these additional configurations belong merely to fanciful imagination, and whether the concrete in its inner nature does not get beyond that abstraction, so that in the Oriental, and specifically the Indian mythology, the infinite wealth of divine persons, who are brought in not simply as powers in general, but as self-conscious volitional figures, continues to be devoid of spirit, or whether in spite of that one necessity, the higher spiritual principle emerges in these persons, and whether in consequence spiritual freedom emerges in their devotees. Thus, in the religion of the Greeks, we see absolute necessity as fate occupying the place of what is supreme and ultimate, and it is only in subordination to this necessity that we have the cheerful company of the concrete and living gods, which are also represented as spiritual and conscious. In the above mentioned and other mythologies, they are expanded to a still larger crowd of heroes, nymphs of the sea and rivers, muses, fauns, etc., and are connected to the customary external features of the world and their contingencies, partly as chorus and accompaniment, as further particularizations of the one of the divine supreme deities, and partly as figures of the minor importance. Here necessity constitutes the abstract power that is above all the particular spiritual, ethical, and natural powers. These latter, however, possess in part only the significance of spiritless, natural power that remains completely subject to necessity, and their personalities are merely personifications, but they also contain in part the higher quality of subjective freedom within themselves, although they do not exactly deserve to be called persons. In this way they stand above their mistress, necessity, to which only the narrowness of this deeper principle is still subordinate, a principle that has elsewhere to await its purification from this finitude in which it initially appears, and has to manifest itself on its own account in its infinite freedom. Okay, fairly straightforward. You can see that the Greeks had a religion of necessity. The consistent working out of the category of absolute necessity is to be looked for in systems that start from abstract thought. The working out concerns the relation of this principle to the manifoldness of the natural and spiritual world. Sorry about that. If absolute necessity is the solely, truly, and genuine actuality, as the solely true and genuine actuality serves as the foundation of the world, in what relation do worldly things stand to it? These things are not only natural, but things also spirit. Spiritual individuality with all its conceptions, interests, and purposes. This relationship has, however, already been defined in that principle. They are contingent things. Further, they are distinct from absolute necessity, but they have no independent being vis-a-vis it, or it vis-a-vis them. It is only one being, and of necessity things by their nature fall into it. What we have defined as absolute necessity is hypostatized, more precisely as universal being or substance, while as a result it is self-mediating unity in virtue of the sublation of mediation. It is thus simple being, and it is alone the subsisting element of things. When our attention was called above to the necessity of Greek fate, it was thought of as an indeterminate power. But being itself has already descended from that abstraction to the level of the things above which it ought to be. Nevertheless, if essence or a substance itself were merely an abstraction, things would have an independent existence of concrete individuality outside it. It must at the same time be defined as the power of these things, the negative principle that makes its validity felt in them, whereby they are precisely what is perishing and transitory and only appearance. We have seen how this negative element is the peculiar nature of contingent things. Thus they have this power within themselves and are not appearance as such, but the appearance of necessity. This necessity contains things, or rather, it contains them, in their moment of mediation. It is not, however, mediated by something other than itself, but it is the direct mediation of itself with itself. It is the alteration of its absolute unity whereby it defines itself as mediation, that is, as external necessity, the relation of an other to an other, and distributes itself into infinite multiplicity into the world that is inwardly conditioned through and through. But it does so in such a way that it degrades external mediation, the contingent world, to a phenomenal world, and in it, as the power of this nullity, it comes together with itself, posits itself as equal to itself. Thus everything is enclosed within it, and it is immediately present in everything. It is the being of the world as well as its change and alteration. Okay, so this stuff is just a recapitulation of what it went on with absolute necessity in the prior lectures that we've read. I think the fastest thing to say about this, to make it more generally intelligible for those who haven't listened to the prior lectures yet, is that absolute necessity is that in which necessity and contingency are moments, are parts of it, and are one. And in being moments of absolute necessity, they are the expression or the appearance of absolute necessity. Absolute necessity is what appears in them and what is true in them. This is why he says, so that's why it's only a self-mediation, because that which is within it as different to it is nonetheless still it, precisely because it is a moment of it. So in being different to itself, it's only really in connection with itself, so its mediation is cancelled and it's still immediately itself. That which appears is not distinct and separate from the necessity. The contingent is in itself an expression of necessity in this case. And the fact that he brought up substance, which is obviously referring to Spinoza's philosophy. The way to think about it would be, exactly a substance. That the way Spinoza thought about God was that everything in the world, the substance, there's only one substance, it's God. It has infinite attributes, and everything that appears is really just the appearance of God. There are no individuals truly except God, and so everything is an appearance. And insofar as we think that it's distinct from God and not simply the expression of God's power, the being of God's substance, we are mistaken. The pantheism of absolute necessity. The determinate quality of necessity as explicated in its speculative concept is in general the standpoint that we are accustomed to call pantheism. It is what expresses the indicated relationship, sometimes in a more developed and explicit form, sometimes more superficially. Already the interest that this name has again awakened in modern times is still more the interest of the principle itself, demand that we should direct our attention to it. The misunderstanding that prevails in regard to pantheism cannot be allowed to pass without being mentioned and corrected, and then we shall have to consider in this connection the place of this principle in the higher totality, in the true idea of God. Since the consideration of the religious configuration of the principle was put aside above, we may, by way of bringing a picture of it before our representation, take the Hindu religion as the most developed form of pantheism. With this development, there is at the same time bound up the fact that absolute substance, the one within itself, is represented as existing in the form of thought distinguished from the accidental world. Religion on its own terms essentially involves the relationship of humanity to God, and as pantheism it leaves the one essential being in the condition of objectivity to a lesser extent than metaphysics imagines. It has left it as an object while maintaining its determinacy. We have first to make note of the remarkable character of this subjectification of substance. Self-conscious thought not only creates this abstraction of substance, but is this abstraction itself. It is just this simple unity as existing for itself that is called substance. This thought is known as the power that creates and preserves the world, and also changes and alters the particularities of its determinate existence. This power is called Brahman. It exists as a natural self-consciousness of the Brahmans, and as the self-consciousness of others who put under restraint and mortify their consciousness in its manifold forms, restrain their feelings, their sensible and spiritual interests, and the activity connected with them, and reduce their consciousness to the perfect simplicity and emptiness of that substantial unity. Thus, this thought, this abstraction of human beings within themselves, is held to be the power of the world. The universal power particularizes itself in the gods, who are nevertheless temporal and transitory, or what comes to the same thing, all life, in the form of spiritual as well as natural individuality, is torn away from the finitude of the nexus in which it is conditioned, on all sides, all understanding of the nexus being obliterated, and is elevated into the shape of existing divinity. And so here earlier we said self-conscious thought not only creates this abstraction of the substance, but is this abstraction itself. It is just a simple unity as existing for itself that is called substance. So, the mystical practices where, the annihilation of the self, ego death, oneness, when you achieve that self-consciousness, you are that abstraction of the undifferentiated substance. And it is an abstraction. As we are reminded, the principle of individualization appears in these pantheistic religions in a form inconsistent with the power of substantial unity. Individuality does not, to be sure, advance to personality, but the power unfolds itself in a sufficiently wild way as an inconsistent transition into its opposite. We find ourselves in a region of unbridled perversity in which the most ordinary form of presence is directly raised to something divine, and substance is represented as existing in finite shapes, while these shapes just as immediately evaporate. This is a direct critique of so-called polytheism in the Hindus, in which a god could be anything. A god could be a monkey, a god could be a cow, God is a tree. Anything can be holy. Anything can be a full manifestation of God. And of course, Hegel says, this is This is a perversity of the divine, because it makes it directly mundane, and any mundane thing, no matter how stupid, can be said to be divine, directly and fully divine in this sense, because everything is the one divine substance, and therefore everything is fundamentally the same. The original worldview is in general this sublimity that directs all individualization into particular configurations and infinitely expands particular existences and interests. It beholds the one in all things, and consequently clothes this purely abstract one with all the glory and splendor of the natural and spiritual universe. The souls of their poets dive into this ocean and drown in it all the needs, purposes, and concerns of a petty, circumscribed life, and revel in the enjoyment of this freedom, upon which they bestow by way of ornament and adornment all the beauty of the world. Don't know what access to poetry they had at Hegel's time. I'm pretty sure they had the Upanishads, because Schopenhauer loved the Upanishads, and he hated Hegel. But what little contact I've had with the Upanishads, it's pretty good poetry. It is about the mystical abstract oneness for the most part, but it's still nice. It's beautiful poetry. It is already clear from this picture, in respect to what I have elsewhere explained my views, that the expression pantheism... What did I miss anything? No, I did. Let me restart that. It is already clear from this picture, in respect to which I have elsewhere explained my views, that the expression pantheism, or rather the German expression in which it is somewhat transposed, that God is the one and all, leads to the false notion that in pantheistic religion or philosophy, everything, that is, every existence, in its finitude and singularity, is held to subsist as God or a God, and that the finite as subsisting is deified. It could only be a narrow, or rather a scholastic kind of mind that would expect this to be the case, and that being wholly unconcerned about what actually is, holds fast to one category, indeed to that of finite individualization, and conceives the manifoldness that it finds mentioned as a permanent subsisting substantial individualization. There can be no doubt that the essential and Christian definition of freedom and of individuality, which as free is infinite within itself and is personality, has misled the understanding into conceiving the individualization of finitude in terms of the category of a subsisting unchangeable atom, and of overlooking the element of the negative that resides in power in its general system. It imagines pantheism as saying that everything, that is, all things in their existing individualization, are God, since it takes the trav in this specific category of referring to all, to every individual thing. Such an absurdity has never come into the head of anybody other than these opponents of pantheism. Pantheism is rather the opposite of the view that has been attributed to it. The finite, the contingent, is not something that subsists for itself. In the affirmative sense, it is only a manifestation, a revelation of the one, only an appearance of the one that is itself merely contingency. Indeed, what is predominant is its negative aspect, annihilation in the power, the ideality of subsisting being, as a momentary starting point, in the power. By contrast, the understanding holds that these things exist for themselves and have their essence in themselves, and thus in and according to this finite essentiality as opposed to the divine or even God. They cannot free themselves from the absoluteness of finitude, and the latter is not to be thought of as something that is sublated and disappears in unity with the divine, but is constantly preserved in it as subsisting. Rather, since the finite, as they say, is robbed of its infinitude by pantheism, the finite has in consequence no being at all. All right, fairly good. So that's Hegel's own version of what we see brought up by multiple people around his time. I know Schelling brought that up. Fichte might have brought it up. I'm not sure. That the primary character of pantheism is precisely that that the finite as finite does not exist. What is it? Hegel calls it in the lectures on the history of philosophy, he calls this position acosmism, that only God exists and we, the finite beings, and everything else do not. Characteristics of systems of substantiality. It is preferable to speak of the philosophical systems of substantiality and not of the systems of pantheism because of the false notion associated with this term. We may take the Eleatic in general as representative of these systems in ancient times and the Spinozistic system in modern times. The philosophical systems are, as we have seen, more consistent than the religions because they keep within the sphere of metaphysical abstraction. The one aspect of the defect that attaches to them is the one-sidedness found in the understanding's representation of the course of elevation, namely that they start from existence at hand, treat it as a nullity, and recognize the absolute one as its truth. They start with a presupposition, negated in the absolute unity, but do not return from the unity to that presupposition. They do not think of the world, which is conceived merely in terms of an abstraction of contingency, of the many as produced out of the substance. Everything passes into this unity as into an eternal night, while this unity is not characterized as a principle that moves itself to its manifestation or produces it, the unmoved that moves, according to the profound expression of Aristotle. A. In these systems, the Absolute or God is defined as the One, as being, the being in all determinate being, the absolute substance, the essence that is necessary not through an other, but in and for itself, the causa sui, the cause of itself and consequently its own effect, that is, the mediation that sublates itself. The unity in this latter characteristic belongs to an infinitely deeper and more developed form of thought than the abstract unity of being or the One. This conception has been sufficiently explained. Causa sui is a very striking expression for this unity, and we may accordingly attend further to its elucidation. The relationship of cause and effect belongs to the element of mediation through an other that we have indicated and whose necessity we have seen, and it is its determinate form. Something is completely mediated by an other to the extent that this other is its cause. The latter is the original thing, therefore utterly immediate and independent. The effect, by contrast, is merely posited, dependent, and so forth. The antithesis of being and nothing, one and many, etc., holds its attributes in such a way that they are valid in their relationship to each other, but are also valid apart from their relationship. Such attributes as positive and whole are indeed related to negative in parts, and this relationship belongs to their essential meaning. But positive as well as negative, whole as well as parts, also signify an existence on their own account outside of this relationship. But cause and effect have a meaning simply and solely in terms of their relationship. The cause does not extend beyond the fact that it has an effect. The stone that falls has the effect of producing an impression on the object upon which it falls. Apart from this effect, which it has as a heavy body, it is physically particular and distinct from other similarly heavy bodies. Or, since it is a cause, while it continues to produce this impression, we take its effect to be transitory. For example, then when it strikes against another body, it ceases to this extent to be a cause, and outside of this relation it is just a stone, which it was before. This haunts representational thinking chiefly insofar as it characterizes the cause as the original thing that constitutes to exist, that continues to exist outside of its effect. Apart from this effect, the stone is undoubtedly a stone, but it is not a cause. It is a cause only in its effect, or to introduce a category of time, during its effect. Cause and effect are thus, speaking generally, inseparable. Each has meaning and being only insofar as it stands in relation to the other, and yet they are supposed to be utterly different. We cling equally firmly to the notion that the cause is not the effect and the effect is not the cause, and the understanding holds obstinately to the independent being of each of these categories in their unrelatedness. When, however, we have seen that the cause is inseparable from the effect, and it has a meaning only in the latter, then it follows that the cause itself is mediated by the effect. Only in and through the effect is it a cause. But this means nothing other than that the cause is the cause of itself, not of another. For that which is supposed to be an other is such that the cause is first a cause in it, and therefore in it simply becomes present to itself and affects itself. Okay, I found this fairly clear. Does anybody want me to go over that again?
It said the cause causes itself. What does he mean by that exactly? How does a cause cause itself? By circling back on itself? How do you...
Yeah, it says, when we have seen that the cause is inseparable from the effect, and that it has meaning only in the latter, then it follows that the cause itself is mediated by the effect. Only in and through the effect is it a cause. But this means nothing other than that the cause is the cause of itself, not of an other, for that which is supposed to be an other is such that the cause is first a cause in it, and therefore in it simply becomes present to itself and affects itself. So the cause posits the effect, but the cause only appears as a cause in the effect, so the effect posits the cause as the cause. So the cause causes itself to be a cause.
Yeah, the cause and effect are the same object.
Yeah, so it's not like the effect is positing a new cause. It's going back to the former cause in like the circle of reason that Hegel constantly talks about.
And I assume that if you think about this, universally, insofar as the world, well, I mean, if this is the case, then you just have cause and effect that aren't separate at all, everywhere.
Yeah, that's the point of this little section, which he says the idea that causes and effects, wholes and parts, and all these other things are actually separate and have a validity outside of each other, independent of each other, is completely mistaken. There's no such thing as a cause that isn't engaging in effect.
Wait, who's mistaken?
Anybody who claims that the cause is a cause primarily because it is that which is independent of the effect, but the effect is dependent upon the cause. But the cause is dependent upon the effect, therefore this is a complete misunderstanding.
I see.
Yeah, it does kind of sound like what he's saying is like an effect too is a cause. My understanding that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, continuing. Jacobi has reflected on this Spinozistic category, the causa sui, and I refer to this critique of it just because it is an example of how Jacobi, the ringleader of the party of immediate knowledge, of faith, who is so much given to rejecting the understanding in his consideration of thought, does not get beyond the mere understanding. I pass over what he says in this passage regarding the distinction between the category of ground and consequence and that of cause and effect, and the fact that in his later polemical essays he believes he has found in this difference a true specification of the nature of God. I merely indicate that the more immediate consequence to which he refers, namely that from the confusion of the two, it may be happily inferred that things can come to be without coming to be, and change without changing, and can proceed or follow one another without being before or after one another. Such conclusions are too absurd to require any further comment. The contradiction to which the understanding reduces a proposition is an ultimate one. It is simply the limit of the horizon of thought beyond which it is not possible to go, but before which one must only turn back. We have seen, however, the solution of this contradiction, and we shall apply it to this contradiction in the form in which it here appears and is here stated, or rather we shall simply briefly indicate our evaluation of the above assertion. The conclusion referred to, that things may come to be without coming to be, and change without changing, is manifestly absurd. We can see that it expresses the idea of mediation with self through an other, of mediation as self-sublating mediation, but that this mediation is directly repudiated. The abstract expression, the things does... The abstract... Sorry. The abstract expression, the thing does its part in bringing the finite before representational thinking. Okay, that's a weird sentence. Seems to be mistranslated. What I think it probably is missing an of. The abstract expression of the things does its part in bringing the finite before representational thinking. The finite is the sort of limited being to which only one of two opposed qualities attaches, in which it does not remain with itself in the other, but simply perishes. But the infinite is its mediation with self through the other. And without repeating the exposition of this conception, we may take an example merely from the sphere of natural rather than of spiritual existence, namely life as a whole. What is well known to us as its self-preservation is happily expressed in thought as this infinite relationship in virtue of which the living individual, of whose process of self-preservation we alone speak here, without paying attention to its other characteristics, continually produces itself in its existence. This existence is not a quiescent identical being, but rather absolute coming to be, change mediation with another, though it returns into itself. The living force of what lives consists in making life come to be, and what lives already is. And so we may indeed say, though it is certainly a strong expression, that such and such a thing comes to be without coming to be. It undergoes change. Every pulsation is a change not only in all the arteries, but in all the parts of its entire structure. In all of this, it remains the same individual, and it remains such only insofar as it is this inwardly changing activity. We may thus say of it that it changes itself without undergoing change, and finally that it, though surely not the things, exists previously without existing previously, just as we have seen with regard to the cause that it exists previously, is the original cause while at the same time previously. Before its effect, it is not the cause, and so on. It is, however, tedious, and would be an endless task to pursue and arrange the expressions in which the understanding presents its finite categories and seeks to validate them as something permanent. Let me see that again, Danny. Someone pointed out that this sentence might also be read, the abstract expression, the things, does its part in bringing the finite before representational thinking. As opposed to what I thought it was, the abstract expression of the things. It makes a difference, but it actually doesn't make that big of an essential difference. Either way, it makes it intelligible. So I found that interesting that this paragraph kind of went in the prior paragraph, it's just like, oh, what Jacobi's saying is clearly absurd. It is a contradiction. And for a second I was like, wait, what? This is Hegel we're talking about. But then he went on and explained, obviously how you can make sense of this. That with infinite things, you have a thing that is infinite and finite at the same time. With living things, you have a thing that is and is not at the same time, that comes to be and does not come to be at the same time. With particular individual examples of natural living things, that's a difficult thing to argue, because people could go well, even the whole itself came to be, so there's just a sequence of comings to be, internal and external constitutive. But in pure concepts, we do have an example of that which comes to be and does not come to be at the same time. Becoming. Becoming just is, and yet at the same time it is coming to be because it is becoming. Comes to be and ceases to be, and ceasing to be and coming to be both cease to be and come to be themselves. And they are expressions, they are the existence of becoming as a totality. But becoming as a totality is that thing which in becoming itself doesn't become, because it is becoming already. So it doesn't become becoming, it is becoming. So as becoming, it doesn't become. And Hegel's totally right that it is extremely tedious to take speculative propositions and show how they actually make sense. It is a fun thing to do, just to bend people's minds a bit, but if you don't gotta do it, you shouldn't be doing it.
With the becoming of becoming, so I just was kind of interested in this. Is the becoming, like becoming does become, it comes out of pure nothing and pure being. So then could we say that because pure becoming is only the explicit saying of what was happening between pure being and pure nothing, that the becoming of becoming is just realization?
I think if becoming is automatically it's become, then it's eternal, basically.
But Hegel does treat them as two different stages. Like there is a dialectical leap from pure being and is dialectic with pure nothing. There's a leap from that to a whole new stage, right? Which is pure becoming. So somehow we get from pure being to pure becoming. So that means pure becoming had to become. But it became itself before it even formally existed, which is like this weird, it's kind of like everything is already implicitly there. We're just making it explicit. That's the point of spirit. It's just something that I noticed and was wondering if you guys picked up on, maybe that's what he means by the becoming of becoming.
Well, becoming doesn't become out of being and nothing. It is. Like, that's a contradiction. Like, it's being and nothing that become. Becoming itself doesn't become. It becomes once it ceases to be and comes to be. And those are the internal becomings of becoming. Becoming as such just is. Because it is becoming. So in becoming and being itself, it's not becoming itself, or it already is itself.
I don't know, because he in the history of philosophy, he says that, you have the Eleatics and they, kind of grouped around pure being and said, oh, the only thing that's real is pure being. And then Heraclitus comes and he says, no, everything, the real truth of everything is pure becoming. And he does say there was like this movement that had to happen in pure thought.
But that's historical. That's not logical.
Yeah, but I mean, the people who, like the Eleatics, who weren't really aware that out of their belief system comes the truth of their belief system, which is pure becoming, that in that moment before pure becoming was realized as the truth of their philosophy, they didn't have it. Do you know what I'm saying? Not in pure thought anyway.
That's it. No, they didn't know it.
Yes, that's right. That's why the pure
between it being true and them knowing it's true.
But that's the point, is that Hegel says even in the realm of pure thought, like in the pure logic developing itself, there is still, like, he actually has a sentence in there that says that pure becoming is really just making explicit what was happening in pure being. And he says the only difference between the two, of moving back and forth between pure being and pure nothing, is that you're just making the reference to each other explicit. You're already doing it. It already existed, right, as the dialectic of pure being. But then in pure becoming, the only thing that changed was that you know it now. You made it explicit. So you kind of, you're touching on the exact same thing.
So in that sense, it didn't become. It already was.
Yeah.
But not explicitly, only implicitly.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter to this. It's the fact that it already was.
But if you didn't know it, did it really exist? It's kind of like everything already implicitly already exists, right? Everything to absolute spirit already exists. It's already all there. But to
Absolute
us,
spirit is eternal.
Yeah, just like the
And
logic is, but not to us as limited beings, only to itself.
it is for us too. We just don't know it until we know it.
But that's the point, is that your knowledge is what makes things real to you. That's how progress is even possible to an eternal spirit that knows everything already.
No,
So that's just my point. I'm just saying that becoming only exists to us because we're finite and we don't know it. But when we know it, yeah, I agree with you, then it's itself.
I can't say I agree with that formulation, but that's going off too far off tangent. So we'll just move on.
Just a thought.
So this understanding of the category of causality, as used by the understanding, occurs in the concept that is expressed by the term causa sui. Jacobi, without recognizing in it this negation of the finite relationship, the speculative element dispatches it in merely a psychological or, if you like, pragmatic way. He declares that it is difficult to claim from the apodictic proposition, everything must have a cause, that not everything can have a cause. Hence the causa sui was discovered. It is certainly difficult for the understanding not only to abandon its apodictic proposition, but also to have to assume another possibility, which moreover has a wrong look in the quoted expression. But it is not difficult for reason, which rather as the free and especially the religious human spirit abandons such a finite relationship of mediation with another, and knows how to solve in thought the contradiction that comes to consciousness in thought. Dialectical development, such as has been given here, does not, however, belong to the systems of simple substantiality, to pantheistic systems. They do not get beyond being or substance, a form that we shall take up again. This category, taken in itself, is the foundation of all religions and philosophies. In all of them, God is absolute being, an essence that exists simply in and for itself, not through another, and that is independence, pure and simple. All right. B. These categories that are so abstract do not go very far and are quite unsatisfactory. Aristotle says of Xenophanes that he was the first to unify. He did not advance anything clearly, and gazing into the whole heavens, into the blue, as we say, he declared that the one is God. If the Eleatics who followed him showed more exactly that the many and the attributes that rest on multiplicity lead to contradiction and resolve themselves into nothing, and if Spinoza in particular showed that everything finite sinks into the unity of substance, then there no longer remains any further concrete, fruitful determination for the substance itself. The development concerns only the form of the starting points that a subjective reflection has before itself, as well as its dialectic, by which it brings the independently appearing particular and finite back into that universality. In Parmenides, it is true that this one is defined as thought, or that what thinks is what has being. So too in Spinoza, substance is defined as the unity of being, or extension, and thought. However, one cannot therefore say that this being or substance is hereby posited as thinking, that is, as inwardly self-determining activity. Rather, the unity that's something to keep in mind. Thinking is inwardly self-determining activity. Rather, the unity of being and thought continues to be conceived as the one, the unmoved, the fixed. There is an outward distinction into attributes and modes, movement and will, a distinction of the understanding. The one is not explicated as self-developing necessity, not in accord with what is indicated by its concept, as the process that mediates necessity with itself and within itself. If the principle of movement is lacking here, it is certainly found in more concrete principles, such as the flux of Heraclitus, also in number 2. But on the other hand, the unity of being I think that's just also a number. But on the other excuse me. But on the other one hand, the unity of being and divine self-equality is not maintained. And on the other hand, such a principle stands in exactly the same relationship to the ordinary existing world as that of being, the one or substance. It's not my voice is tired, it's just got a bit of a cough. Well, maybe my voice is tired, but I'm certainly not tired. Beside this one, there is found, however, the contingent world of being the quality of the negative, being with the quality of the negative, the realm of limitations and finite things, and in this connection it makes no difference whether this realm is represented as a realm of external existence or semblance, or in the definition of superficial idealism, as a merely subjective world, a world of consciousness. This manifoldness with its entanglements is separated initially from that substance, and it is to be seen in what relationship it stands to the one. On the one hand, this existence of the world is merely found or come upon. Spinoza, whose system is the most developed, starts in this presentation from definitions, that is, from the attributes at hand of thought and presentation in general. The starting points of consciousness are presupposed. On the other hand, the understanding forms the accidental world into a system in accord with the relationships and categories of external necessity. Parmenides gives the beginnings of a system of the phenomenal world, at the head of which is placed the goddess necessity. Spinoza did not construct a philosophy of nature, but took up the other part of concrete philosophy, a system of ethics which, in one respect, was to be connected consistently with the principle of absolute substance, at least in a general way, because the highest vocation of human being is its orientation to God, the pure love of God, sub specie aeternitas. However, the principles of this philosophical treatment, the content, the starting point, have no connection with substance itself. Let me go get a drink of water. I'll be right back.
He's gone. We're free. We can say whatever words we want on the internet.
No.
No, you can't.
God damn it.
Anarchy.
No.
All right.
All right. Let's keep going.
It is interesting that Spinoza did not construct a philosophy of nature, actually, now that I think about it. He doesn't have much to say about nature itself. It's kind of weird.
I understand Spinoza's system as being largely about geometry. I don't know how much.
No.
That's...
No, it's
Okay.
just the form is axiomatic, like geometry. So axioms,
okay.
theorems.
Okay. But the thing itself is not geometrical.
No.
Gotcha.
Alright, continuing. All systematic exposition of the phenomenal world, however consistent it may be in itself, becomes, when it follows the ordinary procedure and starts with what is perceived by the senses, an ordinary science in which what is recognized as the absolute itself, the one, the substance, is not supposed to be alive, is not the moving principle, the method, because it is indeterminate. Nothing remains of substance for the phenomenal world unless it is that just this natural and spiritual world is a wholly abstract phenomenal world, or that the being of the world is affirmative, as affirmative is being, the one, substance, or that the particularization whereby being is a world, evolution, emanation, is a falling of substance out of itself into finitude, which is for it a wholly inconceivable mode. It is further implied that in substance itself there is no principle involving the quality of creativity. And thirdly, that substance is likewise abstract power, the positing of finitude as something negative, the passing away of the finite. All right, that concludes lecture 16. Now let me see if this is a different... Okay, it's cosmological proof, a fragment. Since we've already read the specific chapters on the cosmological proof, I don't see a need to really go over it again. Even though this seems to make far more references to Kant. But how long is the teleological proof? 246? 267. Ontological proof, 267, 276. Whoa. 216, that's 30 pages on the cosmological proof. Huh. And the teleological proof is about 20 pages. Ontological is about 10 pages. Well, so much for finishing that today. I suppose this is a good place to stop. I will look over the cosmological proof and see if it's worth rereading that. But certainly next time we'll continue on to the teleological proof and then ontological proof. There's no way we're going to finish 20 pages today. So, alright, for those of you listening, hope you find that interesting. See you next time.